There are few people who are more intricately familiar with the modern SEC and Big Ten, quite like Urban Meyer. And so when he talks about the similarities and differences between those two conferences, I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear what Urban Meyer has to say, because not only working in the SEC and working in the Big Ten, but then working against the Big Ten and SEC, his opinion matters. And so when he said last week that he believes the Big Ten has passed the SEC by, it got people talking, because Urban Meyer's opinion matters. It matters what he has to say. And if you missed his comments, he said on a podcast, he said, you know what the SEC's done? It's raised the level. But the Big Ten has passed the SEC at the upper part. If you would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have said it's not even close, because it's not. End quote. Is Urban Meyer right or wrong about that? Has the Big Ten passed the SEC in the upper echelons? I think it's hard to argue that it hasn't, at least right now, because the same arguments that have been made by the SEC for so long about how and why it's the top dog on the block now relate to the Big Ten. For so long, the SEC was able to say, we win national championships. The Big Ten's won the last 2 national championships. You could argue, I think you'd be wrong for this argument, that the 2024 national championship pitted 2 Big Ten teams against each other in Michigan and Washington. And then in 2025, the semifinals, there were 2 Big Ten teams. One of them advanced on to play the national championship game and win the national championship. The last 2 national champions have been Big Ten teams. And so I think it's really difficult to argue that when for so long the SEC's stance and argument, and it's an undeniably good argument of our conference wins the national championship every year, that's a really hard thing to argue. The Big Ten's won the last 2. I think the SEC argument would be like, yeah, we won like 15 of 17. Okay, fair. But what have you done for me lately? Over the course of the last couple of seasons, is the Big Ten better at the top? Maybe not top to bottom, because I think that's a hard argument to make, because I think at a lot of conferences, there are some really bad teams at the bottom. The Big Ten has some really bad teams. Is the Big Ten's is the Big Ten's worst worse than the SEC's worst? Probably. But I think it's really hard to argue that the Big Ten's best has been better than the SEC's best the last couple of seasons. Texas was the SEC runner-up, and they lost to the Big Ten. Didn't make the championship game team in the playoffs. Georgia won the SEC. Now, they weren't playing with a full deck, but they lost to Notre Dame. There was a time where winning or even making the SEC championship game made you an automatic favorite. And that is not the case right now. And you could argue that NIL has maybe leveled the playing field a little bit in the SEC, or that new teams, new programs, coaches going to different programs have leveled the playing field in the SEC. But the Big Ten, there are a couple of teams with 10.5 win totals. The over-under win totals from Vegas, 10.5 coming into the 2025 season. That's not the case for the SEC. And again, the argument is probably, well, the SEC top to bottom is better than the Big Ten. And I don't think that's an unfair stance to take. But that doesn't prove Urban Meyer right. It doesn't prove Urban Meyer wrong. Because Urban Meyer's talking about the top, the elite, the upper crust of each conference. Is the upper crust of the Big Ten better than the SEC right now? I don't see how you can argue anything differently. I don't know how you can say that it's anything but Yeah, the Big Ten right now. And it's because the Big Ten got its ass kicked for a really long time. And so those schools put the money into facilities, put the money into nutrition, into weight rooms, into support staff, into travel, into coaching salaries. They, to their credit, recognized that they were behind the SEC in a lot of different facets. And for a really long time, the Big Ten recruited Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, etc. The upper crust teams could get kids from Texas and California and Florida, but the Illinois and the Iowas of the world were not going to go to Florida, California, Texas, and win recruiting battles. And then Urban Meyer went to Ohio State and said, I'm going to recruit the best kids possible, and I don't care where they're from. I don't care if they fit inside the Big Ten footprint or not. And then he started to kick everybody in the Big Ten's ass. And so everybody in the Big Ten then had to pivot and go, well, wait a second, we got to recruit the best kids possible too. And all it did was lift the Big Ten out of the dumpster, so to speak, and it made the conference better. That's not to say that it couldn't be different in 2025, that there might be somebody in the SEC. There could be a Texas. There could be a Florida, a Georgia, an LSU that just comes out and dominates from day one and goes on to win the national championship and make this all potentially a moot point. But right now, as it sits here in May of 2025, I think it's really difficult to argue anything other than the Big Ten's best is better than the SEC's best. The argument from the SEC continues to be, well, look at the first round NFL, look at the talent, look at the, and that was the argument in the college football playoff when Alabama didn't get the final spot was, well, if you ask any NFL draft scout, they're going to tell you that the best talent in the SEC, it sure as hell ain't at SMU. That's great, but the results on the field have to matter. And so it cannot be that when the SEC performs really well in bowl games, it's because we're superior, and then when the SEC performs really poorly in bowl games, it's, well, they didn't even want to be there. It can't be both. It can't be the only thing that matters is national championships, and then when you stop winning national championships, go, well, actually, it's about first-round NFL draft talent. Sorry. You can't always have it your way. And I think that's kind of the message from Urban Meyer is like, hey, listen, you guys dominated this thing for like 2 decades, and now you're not dominating. Now, due to a variety of circumstances, the deck isn't necessarily stacked in your favor, and you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to work for it. It's not just going to be that the Big Ten rolls over and lets you have top dog status. And I think that's a good thing for the sport overall. I don't think you should want the same, like in the 4-team college football playoff, what was it, 9 teams, 11 teams made the 4-team college football playoff ever? And in the 12-team college football playoff, we've already had 12 different teams. That's a bad joke. But I think you should want to avoid dynasties as much as possible, because when you're on like Georgia versus Clemson, Alabama versus Clemson, Georgia versus Alabama, round number 9, okay, it doesn't really do much for you anymore. But when you get new blood, different fan bases, different faces at the highest levels of the sport, I think that's a good thing for the sport overall. So was Urban Meyer right? Is the Big Ten the best of the Big Ten above the SEC's best? Right now, I think the answer to that is hell yeah. And I don't know how you can argue that. But I'm willing to hear your argument. I want to hear from you, SEC fans. Why do you believe that you're still the 10,000-pound gorilla that hasn't been dethroned yet? I want to hear from you in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.